The world emerged from the Second World War scarred but hopeful. Nations were eager to rebuild and create a lasting peace. Yet a new conflict was brewing, one that would shape the latter half of the 20th century. This was the Cold War, a period of geopolitical tension between two superpowers. It wasn't a war of tanks and trenches, but a war of ideas, espionage and proxy battles. On one side stood the United States, a champion of capitalism and democracy, promoting freedom and individual rights. On the other side was the Soviet Union, a communist for nearly half a century, influencing policies and alliances. From 1947 to 1991, the world watched, waited and worried as the threat of nuclear war loomed large. The Cold War was a global chess match, with each move calculated to gain an advantage. The two superpowers never directly fought each other, but their rivalry played out in proxy wars and covert operations. But their rivalry permeated every corner of the globe, affecting. The seeds of the Cold War were sown long before the guns of World War II fell silent. The conflict that would dominate the latter half of the 20th century had its origins in the ideological and geopolitical differences that emerged even before the war. The US, a young nation built on principles of individual liberty and free enterprise, viewed the Soviet Union's communist ideology with suspicion. This suspicion was rooted in the fundamental differences in their political and economic systems. The Soviets, meanwhile, saw the US as a capitalist behemoth, its wealth built on the backs of the working class. They believed that the capitalist system was inherently exploitative and sought to promote their own socialist model as a superior alternative. The uneasy alliance forged between the US and the USSR during the war began to crumble. Despite their cooperation against a common enemy, deep-seated mistrust and conflicting post-war visions started to surface. Their shared goal of defeating Nazi Germany had papered over their fundamental differences. Once the war ended, these differences became impossible to ignore. With the common enemy vanquished, old suspicions resurfaced. The fragile wartime alliance gave way to a new era of rivalry and competition. The post-war world order became a point of contention. Both superpowers sought to shape the future according to their own ideologies and interests. The US sought to contain the spread of communism, viewing it as a threat to democracy and freedom. This policy of containment would define American foreign policy for decades. The Soviets, feeling encircled and threatened, sought to expand their sphere of influence. They aimed to secure their borders and promote communism worldwide. This clash of interests and ideologies created a volatile atmosphere, setting the stage for a decades-long standoff. The Cold War would shape international relations and global politics for generations to come. The Cold War was less a traditional war and more a series of proxy conflicts. These were often hot wars fought in distant corners of the globe. The superpowers themselves avoided direct confrontation. Instead, they backed opposing sides in regional conflicts, turning local struggles into proxy battles. The Korean War from 1950 to 1953 stands as a stark example. The Communist North, backed by the Soviet Union and China, invaded the South, supported by the United States and its allies. The war ended in a stalemate, but it solidified the Cold War's division of the Korean Peninsula. From the jungles of Vietnam to the mountains of Afghanistan, the Cold War's shadow loomed large. These proxy wars brought suffering and devastation to countless lives, highlighting the human cost of ideological conflict. Section 4. The Shadow of Armageddon. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the Cold War was the very real threat of nuclear annihilation. Both the United States and the Soviet Union amassed vast arsenals of nuclear weapons, each capable of unimaginable destruction. The world held its breath, knowing that a miscalculation or a misunderstanding could trigger a global catastrophe. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 brought the world to the brink. The Soviet Union's placement of nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from US shores, triggered a tense 13-day standoff. President John F. Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev stared each other down, the fate of the world hanging in the balance. Through a combination of diplomacy and brinkmanship, disaster was averted. The crisis underscored the terrifying stakes of the Cold War and the urgent need for dialogue and de-escalation. Section 5, A Race to the Stars. The Cold War rivalry extended beyond earthly concerns. It reached for the stars in a dramatic space race. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite to orbit the Earth. This achievement sent shockwaves through the United States, sparking fears of a technological gap. The US responded with vigor, pouring resources into its own space program. The world watched in awe as both superpowers poured resources and ingenuity into their space programs. The quest for space supremacy became a tangible symbol of Cold War competition. The space race culminated in 1969 when American astronaut Neil Armstrong became the first human to set foot on the moon. This historic achievement marked a major victory for the United States in the Cold War's technological contest. Section 6, Ideology versus Reality. Historians continue to debate the primary drivers of the Cold War. Was it a clash of ideologies, a battle between communism and capitalism for the soul of the world, or was it a more cynical struggle for power and influence, with ideology serving as a convenient mask for realpolitik? The truth, as with most historical events, is likely a complex blend of both. The ideological divide between the United States and the Soviet Union was real and deeply felt. Yet both sides also acted out of self-interest, seeking to advance their own strategic goals and national security. The Cold War demonstrates the complex interplay between ideas and actions, between the pull of ideology and the pragmatism of realpolitik. It reminds us that history is seldom black and white, but rather a nuanced tapestry woven from competing narratives and motivations. Section 7, A World Transformed. The Cold War finally came to an end in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union, a momentous event that reshaped the global political landscape. The Berlin Wall, a potent symbol of the Iron Curtain that had divided Europe for decades, came tumbling down, marking the end of an era of division and conflict. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief as the threat of nuclear war receded, and a new era of hope and possibility began to dawn. The Cold War's legacy is complex and multifaceted, influencing not just politics but also culture, technology and society at large. It left an indelible mark on global politics, shaping international relations for decades and altering the course of history in profound ways. It also spurred technological innovation, particularly in the realms of space exploration and nuclear science, driving humanity to new heights of achievement. The Cold War serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of ideological extremism and the importance of dialogue and diplomacy in a world armed with weapons of unimaginable destructive power. It reminds us that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable differences, peaceful solutions are always preferable to the path of conflict and confrontation, highlighting the enduring need for cooperation and understanding in our interconnected